noticed there were quite a few Ivy League zingers. I was joking that were going on in the room there before. So I'm happy to say I didn't go to any of the Ivy Leagues. I'll take it out on me. Thank you so for coming in today. I'm so excited to be here with you and to talk about, have a little conversation about an aspect of business that I think is overlooked, and that is our intangible assets. And much as physicists believe that the bulk of the universe is made up of dark matter, sort of look at intangible assets in business as being a very similar thing. You can't touch it, can't feel it, it's hard to, we do know it's there, it's hard to prove it, and like physicists now believe, in the universe, that is the bulk of the universe. And then there's some evidence to indicate that intangible assets are some of the most important assets in our organizations today, and they are the bulk of the value. So what I'm hoping to do today is shine a little bit more of a light on those intangible assets, deepen our appreciation and understanding of them a little bit, and ultimately give you all a framework for telling a story about those intangible assets. Whether it's in the role you're in today or the one that you go into next, if you're a member in transition, I want to give you a framework for telling a better story. And spoiler alert, it is not mission, vision, and values. So quick question for the audience. How many of you have either been through a mission, vision, values exercise within your company? Almost everybody, okay. How many of you have a mission, vision, values statement for your company? Okay, and now how many of you actually remember what they are? Okay, and you have to be honest, okay. So that's one of the challenges that we want to try to address today. So, by way of introduction, my name is JP LeCoeur. I am the founder, one of two founders of a company called BrandFoundations, and we work with mid-market companies to help them really increase the value of their greatest intangible assets, their brand and their culture. And one of the ways we do that is with story and narrative and purpose. I'm also on the board of Conscious Capitalism in New York City, and I understand Jeff Cherry, who was one of the founding members of that chapter, has been here to speak to you. Most of you, I think, saw him last year. He came to speak about Conscious Capitalism. And I run for the New York City chapter a speaker series on higher purpose. It's one of the 4 tenets of conscious capitalism. The notion that every business exists for something beyond making profit. And I'm also a certified culture talk partner, which is an instrument we use, I'll be talking about it briefly, to survey the culture within an organization and understand the character or archetype of your culture, which is very helpful in terms of building a brand narrative. And what I'd like to do today is, again, talk about these intangibles and the impact that they have on your organization, financially and from a performance standpoint. And then I want to talk about the threats to these intangibles, because we live in a period of time now where they have never been more threatened. We're incredibly well connected socially, right? Instant on, constant media, and we're highly divisive. We live in a world where there's a lot of divisiveness. So these,
plus that big caravan that's heading towards us.
Plus that big caravan that's heading towards us. Again, never reinforced. There are some very significant threats to those intangible assets, which then leads into how do we nurture them and how do we protect them over time? What can we do as business leaders to make sure that they are as resilient as possible because we are operating in a difficult environment? And then ultimately, a story framework for you guys to use in telling the story of those intangible assets. So we'll start with what are they? When we look at intangible assets, there's a number of things that kind of fall into this category. Intellectual property would be one a lot of people think of, but also the reputation of the company, its brand and culture, which is what I'm going to talk about a lot today, which ultimately roll up to goodwill. And what we're going to see is some of the statistics that show how much value that has within an organization today. And so in terms of brand and culture, which are 2 of those attributes, I want to just sort of set some expectations, or how we think of them anyway. So for brand, it's really about the DNA of your organization, what you stand for, not your products and services, it's messaging beyond that. And it's usually captured in that one sort of word or phrase that everybody would associate with your organization. Culture is going to be obviously made up of your people and how they behave and those norms, and how you uniquely go about pursuing that purpose, which is really what defines your brand. Now, in an organization like FedEx, just to use an example, here's how these come to life. FedEx's brand, the essence of that brand has always been dependability, if you boil it down to one word, right? When it absolutely, positively has to be there overnight, who do you go to? You go to FedEx. Culturally, this would be contained in the idea of the Purple Promise, which is the award that they give to all their one employee every year. I think there's a couple that actually hand out. For whoever goes most above and beyond to deliver on that promise, to keep the promise of delivering that package. and it's that whatever it takes attitude. So this is kind of how, so those are two of those intangibles and how they sort of play out and the differences between them within an organization. Now, one of the things we know is that intangible assets and these intangibles of brand and culture have a tremendous impact on the ability to price and the valuation of organizations. So in 1975, if you looked at the total value of the S&P 500, only 17% of that was intangible assets and 83% of it was tangible. We're basically living in a world now by 2015 that is the complete reverse of that. According to Ocean Como, 87% of the value of the S&P is intangible. KPMG did a study about 6 years ago where they looked at the exit valuations of companies when they were sold in a private or public transaction. And in those cases, on average, across 14 different industries, I only have 7 of them shown here, but on average, across 14 different industries, the allocation of purchase price that went to goodwill was 50%. So literally half the value of an organization tied up in something that is intangible. And guess what? That number is getting bigger, as we've seen in history, and more so as we have more technology companies, as there's a tremendous amount of private equity money out there looking for deals to go into. These valuations are going up. The amount of it that's going to goodwill and to intangibles is only going to get greater. And it can have an effect on your ability to set price in the market. So there's a fascinating study done by 2 writers called Significant Objects. And you can actually buy a book. There's 2 versions of the book now. 2 writers wanted to test the ability of a purposeful story to change the price of a product, the most mundane product. So they literally went out and they bought 100 items at thrift shops. Salt and pepper shakers, coasters, combs, mirrors, you name it, just little knickknacks, average. Put them up on eBay to see what they would get as a price. Just listed the product. $1.25 was the average price they got for that product. Took them down, hired professional writers to write a little backstory about each object. Nothing crazy. They didn't say this was Lincoln, this is Lincoln's salt and pepper shaker, and just, this came from my grandmother on a boat from Germany, whatever. They made something up, but it was meaningful and was purposeful. They relisted those products on eBay. They sold for an average of $36. It shows you how a purposeful story can change the price of the most mundane, worthless piece of object. But apply that to your own businesses and think about, if I can take what we do that does have tremendous value and give it a really good story, how much more can I get for it? And in my belief, these intangibles fit into the success of any company. You simply cannot be successful with just a strategy. You have to combine it with things like culture and brand. And if you don't have all 3 of them working, you're going to have some kind of a risk. So in one example, you see this with more later stage companies, you could have a great brand and a very purposeful brand and message and story in the marketplace. You can have the right strategy, the right product, you've priced it right, you know how to get it to market. But if your culture is not in alignment with that, things are going to go rogue. And we saw this with Wells Fargo. We saw it with Uber. A couple other examples I'll talk about. Conversely, with more early stage companies, they have a great brand. They know how they're going to change the world. They've got a culture. Everybody's fired up. They know exactly what they're doing. But they don't have the strategy. They don't have they don't know how to get it to market. And they're going to miss the market opportunity because they can't execute. And then the third scenario would be where you have a good strategy. You know how to get your product to market, you've priced it right, you have a good culture, people are happy, they're coming to work, they're doing the right thing. The brand and the purpose behind it just isn't there. Guess what's going to happen? Somebody else is going to come along that does have that sense of energy, and they're going to eclipse you, and they're going to bypass you. So you risk fizzling out. So we think of these intangibles as they are, while we can't see them and touch them all the time, they're critical to the success of any company. So let's talk about a few of the risks to these intangibles. The number one risk, in my mind, is M&A. Everybody is pursuing some kind of a transaction today because there's a lot of money on the sidelines, there's a lot of deals, a lot of baby boomers looking to exit their businesses, the numbers keep going up, and the fact is, most mergers and acquisitions fail to add value to the enterprise. 70% of them, according to KPMG, either don't add anything or they actually detract from it. Right? And the saddest part of this is that leaders know it. They know that the most important factor in the success of any deal is the culture, is the people, okay? And most of them wish they knew more about that and that intangible and understanding it before they went into the deal. And they recognize that it would have made the deal better, it would have improved the outcome, and yet they don't have the ability to do it, or the pressure to get the deal done gets in the way of that. And that has huge impact on your brand and your culture. It can distract employees. It creates all sorts of questions about authority and leadership and who's doing what. competitors take advantage of it. It creates politics, silos. We've all lived through it. We know what happens in a merger. It's the biggest threat to those intangible assets. The second risk can be some kind of an organizational or cultural crisis. I already mentioned Wells Fargo. We know what happened there. They had to drive for great 8 products. Right here you have a brand that represents trust, right, if you put it in one word. And they became kind of a retail operation. They looked at themselves as being a retail operation. So it was all about driving 8 different products to every person at every branch and thinking like a retail operation. And guess what happens? They kind of began to hire and fire like a retail store. In retail, 40% turnover in a branch is normal. In a bank, that's horrific, right? Culturally, they became out of alignment with what their brand and their purpose was all about. And we know what happened. The CEO left, huge scandal, billions of dollars in lost value. Similarly, Uber, a much more smaller, more modern company, but with the antics of its CEO, using the technology to get around the authorities, to manipulate drivers, angering a lot of people, and ultimately seeing a delete Uber campaign that, when it first came out, 200,000 people deleted the app. I deleted the app. Said I'll use Lyft or somebody else. And United, we all know what happened with United when they dragged that passenger off. BrandWatch actually does a weekly study of the positive impressions of brand, and the week afterward that dropped from like 92% to 32%, and the market cap was down. So huge financial impact when there's a cultural or internal organizational crisis. And then the third is sort of societal and political. And these can come, and this is sort of newer. We've started to see this in the last 2 or 3 years. This can come via a tweet from our president or some other political leader, in the case of Harley Davidson, right? It can come just because you get caught up in a social movement, or it can come from your employees. In the case of Harley Davidson, they were criticized by President Trump, and they're a big supporter of President Trump, a very patriotic company, but they don't exist to wave the American flag. They exist to give people the freedom to ride. And when the president raised tariffs, and they couldn't manufacture them at a cost that would make it possible for people in Europe to have the freedom of the road and to ride, then what did they have to do? They had to go move their production over there. Similarly, Starbucks, when they threw those 2 patrons out in Philadelphia, they knew what they needed to do. They got caught up in this Black Lives Matter thing. But in both of these cases, these firms were very clear on their purpose and what they stood for. In Starbucks' case, it's not about selling a cup of coffee. And they threw those guys out for not buying anything, right? Hanging out and happened to be black. Starbucks exists. Its founding vision was to create that third place. It's not work, it's not the office, it's that third place you go to meet and interact and connect with people. That's what those guys were doing. And so to throw them out was such an affront to what that company stood for that the leadership knew exactly what it had to do. Okay, and this is kind of the resilience of being clear on your intangibles and knowing how to act against them. And they closed every store down in the country, and they put people through training to understand that again. That's the power of kind of being really clear on what these things are. Compare that to the NFL, which has kind of waffled back and forth on what to do about players taking a knee. And what's the end result? Everybody's angry at the NFL. Okay? People may be angry at Harley Davidson, but they can stand on it because they knew what action they had to take. And even yesterday, or I guess Thursday of this week, people read about Google, all those 1,000 employees walking out of Google because they didn't like how they handled the sexual harassment settlements, or Microsoft and Deloitte employees kind of rioting over the fact that companies doing business with ICE. These sort of social, political crises can come even from your employees. So again, recognizing that and being aware of that threat will help us as leaders think about how do we react to this. So this stuff can come from anywhere in this hyper-politicized, controversial world that we live in. So that's another threat. And the fact is, we used to live in a world where brands could be apolitical. Michael Jordan is famous for saying back in the early 90s, somebody criticized him for not taking a stand on some kind of an issue, political, and he said, why won't you speak up? And he said, Republicans buy sneakers too. And the fact is today, people expect leaders to stand up on these issues, to take a stand on these issues, and if you're not clear on your purpose, it becomes really hard to do that, or you step into what's a landmine situation. I asked the question earlier in the earlier session about this lack of institutional truth and trust to Noel, and that sort of gets at this. This is an opportunity for business leaders. If we don't trust government, if we don't trust media, if we don't trust higher education, we all want something to believe in. We all need somebody who we believe can help us fix these big intractable problems in the world. It's an opportunity for business. So they're going to have, business leaders are going to have to embrace that. They're going to have to take stands on controversial issues, and being really clear on these intangibles and what you stand for is going to be the first step in doing that. So what are some best practices for sort of nurturing these intangibles and building some resilience in them? So the first is, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Probably everybody remembers this from Abraham Maslow from like high school psychology. The point here is that if you want to get the most out of people, it's not by paying them. We all know this intuitively, right? It's intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators. National Institutes of Health did a study where they looked at where do you begin to get a diminishing return in happiness from income. And on average, okay, we all live in New York, so we're out beyond the average, but on average in New York, sorry, on average in America, it's $75,000. Beyond $75,000, you begin to have a diminishing return, and how much more happiness you get, how much more devotion and encouragement you'll get out of people, right? And it makes sense. If I double someone's income from $35,000 to $75,000 approximately, I could quite likely get twice as much out of it in terms of loyalty and performance and effort, right? Because I made a huge difference in their life, right? So I've taken them, from probably what was even below this, almost getting into advanced income. If I double them from $75,000 to $150,000, am I going to get twice as much effort and loyalty out of them? From $153,000 to $100,000? Probably not. It starts to tail off. If you want to get the most out of people, you have to go to the top of the hierarchy, and that's practice and self-actualization. It's having an impact in the world. That's where you get people who come in on weekends, get up early and speak on a Saturday.
I'm going to double your salary.
Or come to listen to me speak on a Saturday.
Thanks, Mark.
Sit through this thing on a Saturday. There's a sense of purpose because you believe in it, and so you have to build that into the organization. You've got to have that strong sense of purpose. You've got to be able to define it. That will help you get the most out of people. Second thing is when we think about these intangibles and how to communicate them, they are going to reside in fundamental human values. They're not going to be about your products and services. So we've got to step beyond that. And Jim Stengel was the global marketing officer of P&G for about 15 years during the, I think, late 90s to early 2000s. And he actually he was responsible for every brand within P&G's portfolio. He commissioned a study to look at the companies in the world that performed best. And they actually identified them as the Stengel 50. That's what the stock index, you can actually check. And those 50 companies had, the difference among them and everybody else was that they had this incredibly crystal clear brand ideal, this thing that they stood for, and then it was woven operationally into the culture of the organization. So it affected everything from how they hired and recruited to how rewards and recognition, compensation, you name it. And that's what he did at P&G. What they found was that those companies performed over a 12-year period, which included 2 recessions. They outperformed the rest of the S&P by something like 400%, okay? Which again speaks to that resiliency. Even in periods of downturn and economic strife, these companies were outperforming everybody else. But what he theorized is that those brands and cultures, they found that essence, that brand idea, what they were about, and one of 5, and I think there are others, but this is his theory, one of 5 sort of brand ideals. You're either about enabling connection, right? Starbucks, you go to that 3rd place. My company, BrandFoundations, we chose to kind of build our brand around this idea of connections. We exist to help everybody feel more connected to a brand and to a company. Whether you're an employee, family member, a partner, customer, or prospect, we want you to feel a deeper connection to that business. That's what we do. So we're clearly in that enabling connection idea. On the other end, you've got things like eliciting joy, Coca-Cola, Zappos. Does anybody know what Zappos mantra is, or their tagline, or delivering tagline anymore? Happiness. Delivering happiness, right. So there's a great story about this. Tony Hsieh, before he moved the company to Las Vegas, he was there on vacation with a couple friends. It was early in the company's history. And they were out late one night, they come back to the hotel, and his buddies are ribbing him about the deliver happiness thing. And he goes, you know what would make me, or one of his friends said, you know what would make me really happy right now? It'd be a pizza. Do you think if I call the 1-800 number for Zappos, they'll deliver me a pizza? And he goes, I don't know, why don't you call and find out? And the guy picks up the phone, calls, he gets the 800 calls, gets one of the 800 people, overnight. And he says, I understand you deliver happiness. I would really like a pizza right now. I'm really hungry. And the guy says, we're a shoe company, right? We deliver shoes. Yeah, but isn't your motto deliver happiness? Okay, hang on a second. Pulls up his browser, what hotel are you in, finds the nearest pizza, what do you want on the pizza, what room are you in, and has the pizza delivered. Which just shows you how, if you are really serious about this stuff, and you get really in touch with it, and you train and make it the centerpiece of everything a company does, you can have huge impact. I guarantee you, very few companies would ever kind of live up to that sort of standard, but. Another thing to think about here, and this is kind of the segue into it, is that your brand and your purpose and your culture are a reflection of your audience. And as much about them as they are about you as an organization. So when people tattoo themselves with a corporate logo, which when you think about it is like kind of insane, right? You're becoming a walking billboard for an inanimate. The only way you're going to do that is if you feel such a deep connect, like that thing reflects something about who you are. And so if you think about these two companies, Apple and Microsoft, just to use that example again, and you go back to their origin story, again, Steve Jobs founded Apple with this notion of challenging convention, challenging the status quo, being a little bit crazy and a little bit elitist, right? I'm not like everybody else, I'm crazy. So if you believe that about yourself, you probably gravitated towards Apple as a creative type, so certainly. Whereas Microsoft, Bill Gates' founding vision for that company, does anybody remember what it was? It was a computer on every desktop. And it doesn't get any more democratic and every person than that notion, right? It's the complete opposite. And so if you saw yourself in those terms, you work in back office IT and you're just like everybody else, you're not an elitist, you probably gravitated towards Microsoft. And it's not that one was necessarily better than another, or one's right or one's wrong. It's about how you saw yourself. The question becomes, to get to your point, how do you understand the character of your audience and what's going to connect with them, right? What purpose and what brand will connect with them? This is a framework that we use called archetypes. And again, go back to some high school psychology. Carl Jung, back at the turn of the century, theorized that deeply within each of us were seated these characters that were almost genetically imprinted in us from tens of thousands of years of storytelling. Right? We all know the hero's journey. We recognize the caregiver, the explorer, etc. And these give you a framework for understanding your audiences. We use a tool called Culture Talk to actually survey the organization and find out what are the dominant archetypes. And once you know the dominant archetypes within an organization, it tells you a couple things. What are sort of positive and negative attributes of them? So as an example, in a lot of the companies that we work with that tend to be in the technology space, you see a lot of dominant caregivers and heroes. Caregivers and heroes share some common traits. They will go above and beyond to deliver on the purpose of the company, to achieve whatever the mission is. They will work themselves to the bone. That's a positive aspect. On the downside, they burn out. How you treat them is very different. The hero has to slay a dragon. They have to win. They have to vanquish an enemy. They have to get an award, or they're not fulfilled. Caregiver just needs to be recognized. Thanks. So you learn a lot about how to manage the people within the organization, and you can find a narrative and a storyline that will connect them. So this is one of the tools that we use, and it gives us a lens to understand and begin to, for leaders to be able to understand, what do I really have here with these intangibles? What does this culture really mean? Next thing you want to do is you want to align your brand and your culture. And you do that with purpose. That is the thing that can bring the two together. So I had an experience of this firsthand. My son and I started taking Taekwondo about 4 years ago. And last year at this time, so it was about a year ago last weekend, we went to our black belt retreat for first degree black belt. And that retreat involved 3 days at a camp out in Pennsylvania and with like 10 different schools from the United Martial Arts District, which is everything in upstate New York and down to Jersey and Westchester and Putnam. So you have hundreds of people showing up at this camp, most of whom have never met each other before. And literally within hours, there was a degree of camaraderie and support and just energy that came out of that. Like before we were even done Friday night, people were all on the same page. And it was because we all had a common purpose. We were there to get our black belts. And these were people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, religious, social, I mean, you name it. It was a complete panoply of humanity in this room. And that camaraderie allowed us, individually and collectively, to scale walls. We had to go wall climbing, to break through things. That's me having a hammer fist a concrete brick. To do things we never thought we could have done, my belief is that purpose, having a purpose, whatever that purpose is, kind of becomes the big bang of culture. Like when you have that, it's that starting point, it's that thing that brings everybody together. And I've never seen anything quite like that. I've been doing this for a long time, but that setting, it was like palpable. You could taste it. It's very, very powerful. And I wanted to show you a picture of me breaking a concrete block. One other thing is you need to put this stuff in writing. And I use the Declaration of Independence as like a perfect example of this. And coming out of the early morning session, this is probably apropos in the fact that we're coming up on election day. We argue about everything in this country. Right? We argue about foreign affairs, we argue about economics, schools, education, you name it. But everybody, we even argue over the intent of the founders in the Constitution, right? What did they mean by this? That's why we have the Supreme Court. But everybody looks at the Declaration of Independence and says, I believe in that. And we celebrate it every year. And that is the power of kind of getting clear on this stuff, putting it in writing, and not enough organizations do this. And that document has allowed this country to survive 300 plus years, right? And hopefully 300 more. Seriously creating that more perfect union, we hope that that will continue. And I think that this gives us that one thing we can go to. And if you can give people that purpose, they will more likely, if you're going through M&A or some big change event, more likely to focus on that, more likely to get them to adopt a change. They can see what the shared purpose is. That's the power of this stuff. And finally, you have to put it in a story. And this is going to segue into the last part. So we're wired to understand stories as we're young, believed about those archetypes. Brain science today shows us that when we hear a story, something like 7 or 8 parts of the brain are activated compared to 2 when we hear a fact. We leave chemical traces along the neural pathways in our brain when we hear a story that'll aid in the ability to recall it and retell it. Right? Okay. And as an example of this, here's a real simple story. Right? A small group of powerful interests have aligned themselves, rigged the system to perpetuate their power at the expense of everybody else. And we all recognize that story. And as an example of how powerful that is, that story can appeal to 2 completely different audiences. Whether you supported Bernie in the last election, okay, and the bad guy is Wall Street, or you supported Trump, and the bad guys are Washington and the establishment or whatever, you believe that story, which gets to the point of how powerful putting this stuff into a story is, and to be able to find a story that brings completely unique people together. This one I don't know that will bring these 2 audiences together, but it gives us hope that you can start to bridge some of these differences. So with that in mind, I'm going to tell you guys, I'm going to close with a story, which is a story within a story of something that I did that led to this framework that allowed you guys to tell a better story. So about a year and a half ago, my partner and I set out to change the way we market and to do some more thought leadership and some more content marketing. And so we hired a person to help us. She developed an editorial calendar, and one of the topics in there was mission, vision, and values. And it was a Saturday afternoon, and I'm sitting in White Plains because my daughter was volunteering at Heart Song, which is a art therapy place. I had like 4 hours every Saturday to kill, so I'm in a coffee shop. And I open the editorial calendar and I say, oh, mission, vision, values. I have to write about that. Great topic. These are like among the most important statements a company can put in writing, right? They will affect the culture of the organization, how people behave, the brand, the value, right? This is great stuff. It's like to write about it. And the first thing I did was I said, what's the difference between mission and vision again? And I Googled it. And this is what I found. Nearly 100 million documents or articles related to mission versus vision. How do you tell a mission statement versus a vision statement? And I said, that's a problem. And then I started to look at brands that I respected. I'm going to keep coming back to FedEx, and then I'm going to rescue them at the end and say, this is FedEx's mission statement. And I challenge any of you to tell me that would motivate you as an employee, as a partner, as a customer. No. They've completely missed the mark. And I saw this again and again and again. There's plenty of brands that have terrible mission statements. And there's some that do it well, all right? This is not one. And then I kept looking, I even stumbled across mission statement generators. There's one by Dilbert, branded by Dilbert. And we create things like this. We can be relied upon to collaboratively provide access to competitive paradigms to produce solutions for our partners. We are in the business of improving the highest quality personal gain by saying, blah, 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 whatever. You know, at this point I'm like, this is a joke. Like, how can we even have these, right? It's literally jumped the shark. It's become a joke. It's become a popular joke. And then I started looking at core values. 99% of the Fortune 500 have integrity as a core value. We're in business. This is a financial transaction that's taking place. It's sort of implied I'm not going to rip you off, right? We shouldn't have to, like, oh, by the way, I'm not going to rip you off. We're doing business together. Great, thanks. The fact you need to tell me that, it's kind of ridiculous. So that's the point at which I realized I'm not writing another article about how to write a mission, vision, value statement. In fact, I'm going to declare the entire thing dead. And so I wrote this article, and I put it up on LinkedIn, and it went viral. And it's now been read, shared, liked almost 100,000 times. Okay, so like the first time and the only time I've ever had anything that went totally viral, and I was like, wow, definitely struck a nerve. And this is the reason why. I didn't just say it was dead. I looked at why I thought it wasn't working. So mission, vision, values first showed up in business school curriculums in the 1960s. Perfectly captured the imagination and the spirit of the World War II generation, post-World War II generation, right? It just won World War II, man in the gray flannel suit, working in the organization, gonna go after the mission. Not so resonant with today's millennial workforce, which is the bulk of the people in the workforce today. In addition, it's got this confusing construct and structure. How does the mission relate to the vision? How do the values play into this? How do we tell a story? How do we remember any of this stuff? It's not there. So people don't tell a story, don't remember it, right? And when everybody's got integrity as a core value, you're not doing anything to differentiate your organization using it. You see the same things over and over and over again. And as a result, nobody uses it. You know, maybe it shows up in the annual report or it's up on the wall, but it's not an effective tool. And it should be. These are way too important messages for our organizations to not have them be something that people get, remember, and actually talk about. So then we proposed an alternative. We call it purpose, way, and impact. And it was just a very simple idea of the 3 stages of a rocket. The reason we use the rocket in 3 stages is because it gives you some construct to tell a story. Okay? So we'll talk briefly about each of these. So, and our belief is that that first stage, that purpose, is all about the reason you exist beyond making money. And it's very much rooted in change. What is wrong with the world that you're trying to change and make better? Okay? And it will be the thing that fires up people, gets them started, gets the first stage that's really kind of the origin story to gets the business off the ground. Most entrepreneurs start a business because they're trying to fix a problem. So that's what we're focusing on. What is the thing we're trying to change in the world? Not just to go out and make money. The next stage is going to be the way statement. The way statement is going to be made up of 2 things. Usually something functional about the business, some intellectual property, something you do different than everybody else as a business, but then also something much more human about the people and the culture that ties into that. And you want to nail both those 2. In the article that I wrote, I used sort of Southwest Airlines as an example. And I talked about how their purpose was to democratize air travel, right? To make it possible for anybody to fly around the country. And that's their motto today, right? Bing, bing, you're now free to fly about the country. Right? And the way they go about doing that was one functional thing: we keep costs down. That's kind of defines them, right? Keep costs down, we're no frills. They were the first ones to do that. And something more human. We're going to use humor to get through this. We're not going to give you a bunch of peanuts and perks and crap like that. We're just going to laugh because it's a pain in the ass to travel. We all know that. So let's at least have some fun with it, right? That's not taking all their core values. They got safety as a core value. I guarantee it, they're an airline, right? But that's not going to be what defines them. And your way statement should be the 1 or 2 things, not all your core values, but 1 or 2 that really define you in the marketplace and make you different. And then the last stage is going to be the third stage, the impact statement. And instead of a vision statement, which is typically, we intend to be the best company, blah, 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 which is all about you and nobody cares, you make this about everybody else. If I get into orbit and I've achieved this purpose and I look down at the rest of the world, what have I done? What's been the impact I've had on lives? And it's going to be lofty, and you may never actually achieve it, and that's okay. But the point is, that's the thing you keep aiming for, and it's tied to purpose. And it shouldn't be about you, it should be about everybody else. So to bring this to life, just in closing, I'm going to come back to FedEx. So when Frederick Smith started the company in the 70s, you could not reliably ship a package around the world overnight. The airlines and the infrastructure were not set up to move packages, they were set up to move passengers. All right? So that was their purpose. In my mind, I've created this, they've never authorized this, they don't know about it. So I don't think they know about it. If any of you work for FedEx, let me know. But this is something we use as an example to create, because this is, I think, how we bring it to life. But their purpose would be to give any person or organization the ability to conduct a physical transaction anywhere in the world as quickly as possible. Overnight, whatever you want. That would be their purpose. The way they go about doing that, okay, is by combining something functional, which is all the modern logistics and transportation technology, all the stuff that they would love to talk about, but with one very human thing, which is that whatever it takes attitude. I talked about the Purple Promise Award earlier, right? That has become so powerful that it is folklore in our country. Is everybody seeing Castaway? What happens at the end of the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks?
He brings the package to the girl.
Exactly. After 10 years on an island, they finally rescue him and they have the big party. Guess what? He wins the Purple Promise Award. And at the end of that, you see him driving down in the desert with the package that he kept and delivering it. That is how powerful this stuff becomes when you focus on the right stuff. And that idea is nowhere in that mission statement that you saw from them. And ultimately their impact, right, if you do this right, if they achieve that purpose, is that everybody can conduct commerce, world shrinks, you see our commonalities, whatever, you can make anything up here, but give them something to believe in, it's, to aim for, to make the world a better place. So that is my view from orbit, so to speak. And if you want to learn more about us, you can go to BrandFoundations.us. But with that, I just want to say thank you and open it up to questions.
So I'm going to take a real stand, and that of appreciation. Jim, who brought JP to us.
Yeah.
Jim and I'll be at the bar.
That's right. And so now